Hello. I'm in serious travel mode now. I've got the pink singlet on. I got this the first day I was in South Africa. And I've got this safari hat. So I stopped in Cootamundra. You must have been through here if you're on your way to Cowra, Young. I'm turning off just before Young. Skirting around and probably what you do as well. I've stopped at Woolies here in Cootamundra. I've got some bread rolls and a bit of deli meat and some cheese. When I get to the next Boer monument, I'm going to stop, get my cooker out and make a brew, a cup of Yorkshire tea and a bread roll or so. And there's no rush, is there, in these things? So yeah, I've seen some great little New South Wales country towns. I think I came at Geneva from a different direction than you would have. You would have been coming up from Wagga, whereas I was coming from Narrandera. So yeah, I'm enjoying myself today. Doornkloof, the 21st of February 1902. We rely a great deal on the special correspondent with Colonel E.C. Williams' column for information on the 2nd New South Wales Mounted Rifles and the 3rd New South Wales Imperial Bushmen in the drives against the commandos in the Eastern Transvaal. In this account, written from Wonterhoek, on the 23rd of February 1902, we learn of the decimation of Commandant Petrus Trichard's Middelburg Commando, which was trapped at Doornkloof on the Botersburg. Quote, at 7:30 o'clock on the evening of February the 20th, the fighting troops of Williams, Parkes and Urmston's columns moved from the little station of Pan in a northerly direction, the convoy following an hour later, and travelling all night covering a distance of nearly 20 miles. About daybreak, the flying column reached a farm where it was hoped that the well-known Commandant Trichard, who was known to have a very strong following, would be surprised. But not a solitary Boer was to be seen. Intense disappointment was generally felt, for it seemed as though the 9 hours' ride was to go for nothing. It was perfectly obvious from various signs the Boers had quite recently been lagered at the farm, but their vigilance had apparently enabled them to obtain warning of our approach. The order to retire was given, but Colonel Williams, instead of merely retracing his steps, made a wide sweep round to his right. The three columns were working separately but in conjunction with each other. In deciding upon this movement, he thought it possible that a few stragglers might be picked up at some of the other farms in the vicinity, but as events proved, a complete surprise was in store for him and us. We came to the farm Noordgedacht. There are hundreds of Noordgedachts in the Transvaal, and heavy British losses are associated with the name, but so that there may be no confusion as to the locality of this particular one, let me say that it is situated in the Botersburg Range, and about 20 miles slightly east of north from Middelburg. The adjoining farm is Doornkloof, and the country is exceedingly rough. It was at Noordgedacht, then, that Colonel Williams, with his 2nd New South Wales Mounted Rifles, that's Lieutenant Colonel Lassiter, and the 3rd New South Wales Imperial Bushmen, Major Carrington, quite unexpectedly discovered a great body of the enemy. With wild cries of exultation, which surely must have demoralised the Boers, the New South Wales men set off at a gallop, regardless of the obstacles which lay in their path. A heavy fire met them as they advanced, but fortunately with only trifling results. Bullets just barely touching 2 or 3 and perforating the clothing of several of our fellows. Colonel Lassiter, taking up a good position with a portion of the regiment, maintained a heavy and accurate fire for some time, while the others were sent on in pursuit of the Boers, who now began a hurriedly retreat. There were about 300 of them. Some managed to make their escape early, and among those who succeeded in getting away was Commandant Trichard. The bulk of the commando, however, was driven on to Doornklof, and Colonel Williams handled his troops so admirably that at last there was no possible way of escape for the flying Boers, except by way of a particularly deep kloof. Undaunted by the huge rocks which lined the precipitous sides of the valley, many of them urged their horses down it. In this supreme effort to avoid capture, they seemed utterly regardless of consequences, and not a few received serious injuries through their horses falling with them, while several of the frantically spurred animals were afterwards found to have broken their backs and legs by the violent contact with the rocks. But even those who reached the bottom of the kloof safely, hoping that the road to freedom there lay unimpeded, were doomed to terrible disappointment, for they found their further progress barred by the other columns, which had taken up positions in front, while behind them, equally regardless of consequences, parties of our men tore madly down after them. The Boers were thus completely cornered. Escape for those remaining was now an absolute impossibility, and realising this fact as our troopers rode among them shouting, "Hands up!" they accepted the inevitable. It was a remarkable scene, furnishing an excellent instance of how the strongest and bravest men may become thoroughly terror-stricken when demoralised. Flinging down their rifles, they ran here, there and everywhere, most of them with their arms in the air, groaning and shouting as though suffering violent pain. Some few there were, however, who refused to throw up their hands to the hated khakis. One giant, who, while his comrades were surrendering all around him, had fired the last cartridge from his magazine at an officer a few yards away, but fortunately without hitting him, let his rifle fall to the ground, then folded his arms and stood waiting. "Hands up!" roared the officer past whose ear the bullet had swished. "I will never hands up to a Britisher," was the reply, but as he was now unarmed and helpless, he was speedily a prisoner with the others. It was in every respect a most important capture. At least 2 Boers were killed. We heard next day of several other bodies having subsequently been found, and our ambulance wagons took back to camp 9 wounded Boers, whilst our prisoners totalled no fewer than 163, all being armed and belonging to the famous Middelburg Commando. When questioned, each one declared he had been fighting since the beginning of the war. Very many of them spoke English excellently and readily admitted that they had long been sick and tired of the war, but had felt it their duty to keep fighting. The government had told them that if they could hold out till April, they would certainly have the Transvaal restored to them. To Colonel Williams' column belongs the chief credit for the capture, for of the 163 prisoners, over 120 were taken by our men. The mounted rifles happened to be in the advance and captured 95 Boers. In addition, the rifles and bushmen took over 400 head of cattle. In column orders that night, Colonel Williams expressed his high appreciation of the admirable conduct of the troops under his command. As a result of the capture, 36 members of the same commando went in and surrendered at Middelburg that evening. Yeah, just population of 100 is Neville, the town of Neville. And I doubt anybody has ever come here just to see this memorial. Certainly not hard to find. The War Memorial Park. It looks like it's been touched up with new black. I'm assuming this is the Boer War one. It looks the era, doesn't it? But they may have added all the other guys. No, it says Boer War and World War One. Okay. Yeah, originally it was just Boer War, I reckon. They've taken the lettering off. Neville, Shaw, Roll of Honour. No, it says the Great War. I'll have a show you. So, a bit confusing. I think it has been reused to add all the other names for the other wars, but I think it is a Boer War monument. Look at the shape of it and the discoloration of the marble. Although it could be World War One. A couple of kids over there playing country tennis. Well, that's a Boer War memorial. Must be a town called Shaw as well, I think. Well, this is the tiny little hamlet. 100 people live here. The Western Transvaal, July-August of 1901. Hasler's Australian Scouts at Leeuwfontein. Colonel Williams' column moved out from Klerksdorp on Saturday, July the 27th in a northwesterly direction towards Hartbeesfontein, where they hoped to trap a Boer lager, but the Boers had gone. Just before the column had left Klerksdorp, a body known as Hasler's Australian Scouts had been formed under Captain Julian Hasler of the East Kent Regiment, the Buffs, who had been a special service officer with the New South Wales Imperial Bushmen and served as one of Colonel Williams' staff officer. This unit numbered about 30, having been drawn from the 2nd New South Wales Mounted Rifles and the 3rd New South Wales Imperial Bushmen. This account of an action involving Hasler's Scouts on Sunday the 28th of July 1901 comes from the special correspondent of the Sydney Morning Herald, whose letter was sent to Schweizeranica in the southwestern Transvaal under the date of the 4th of August 1901, quote, Hasler's Scouts were 2 or 3 miles in advance of the column, and when they saw camp being formed for the day, commenced to retire. A few moments afterwards, a couple of shots were fired at them, and almost immediately they sighted 2 horsemen, after whom they at once set chase. It was clear, fairly level country, but as in so many parts of South Africa, ant holes abounded, and into these several horses stumbled, throwing their riders to the ground with more or less force. The others dashed on and in extended formation, the flying Boers leading them in the direction of a gradually rising slope and disappearing over the ridge, from the top of which, as the pursuers approached, there opened a smart rifle fire. Thus, taken by surprise, the scouts received the order, "Files about!" and back they galloped down the hill, at the foot of which they halted ready to return fire. Coming on towards them, they saw 50 or 60 horsemen, a number of whom wore British cavalry cloaks. As they advanced nearer, it became quite easy to distinguish the khaki uniforms worn by others. Convinced now that they had been fired on by a British party who had mistaken them for Boers, Captain Hasler and his followers held up their rifles with their hats on them as a sign that they were friends. The Boers, for they really were khaki-attired Boers, accepted this as a sign of surrender and confidently advanced, their leader riding out from them within speaking distance. "Who are you?" shouted Captain Hasler. "What the deuce do you mean, firing on your own men?" Something unintelligible was the reply. English, however, that it was in Dutch. "They're Boers. Open fire, boys," was the order, and both parties instantly set to work. Captain Hasler's horse was immediately shot, and he himself rendered hors de combat by a bullet which entered his left calf. The engagement was a decisively vigorous one. both Boers and Australians taking advantage of such cover as the numerous anthills which studded the ground afforded, and that it was fought at unusually close quarters may be realised from the fact that Sergeant Seymour of the Scouts actually struggled hand-to-hand with a Boer. Seymour had emptied his chamber when he found the muzzle of a rifle within a few inches of his chest and heard the command, "Hands up!" He relinquished his rifle but threw his arms around his opponent. For a few seconds the two wrestled in deadly earnestness. At last the Boer freed himself sufficiently to enable him to get his own rifle into a favourable position, and pulling the trigger he saw the brave Australian fall to the ground, shot through the heart. Another of the scouts was wounded, and a Boer was bending down apparently with the intention of searching him, when Trooper Porter, who had 2 bullet holes in his clothing, having just discharged his rifle, and having no time to fix his bayonet, banged the butt end of his weapon down on the Boer's head and silenced him forever, the blow being of such force that he was killed instantly. At the beginning of the fight, a messenger had been sent into camp to report the affair and ask for assistance, and in an almost incredibly short space of time the left wing of the New South Wales Mounted Rifles C and D squadrons, commanded by Captain Lydiard, which had formed the advance guard of the column, were travelling at full gallop in the direction of the sound of the firing. No sooner had the Boers caught sight of them than, mounting their horses, they started off helter-skelter in a most erratic retirement. The Rifles chased them for some miles, but the Boers were admirably mounted and disappeared behind a kopje, behind which, under the circumstances, Colonel Williams considered it would be imprudent to venture at that hour of the day. The Scouts undoubtedly behaved with great gallantry in a very trying situation. Their casualties numbered 4. Sergeant Seymour killed, Captain Hasler left calf, and Trooper Huxley right arm slightly wounded. Trooper Bryant right arm severely wounded. 5 or 6 horses were shot, but considering the nature of the engagement, the number of our casualties was remarkably small. When the ambulance people under Captain Samuelson went out, they picked up the bodies of 2 dead Boers and 3 others who were horribly wounded, one of them dying that night. It is said that 2 more Boers were killed and that some of the wounded were carried off by their comrades. Is tolerably certain, for we afterwards learnt from a Russian at Kranafontein, where the Boers camped that night, that Commandant Vermaas, a portion of whose commando it was that we engaged, admitted 12 casualties, but declared that the British loss was 100. Now this one took a little bit of looking around for. I'm in a little town called Blaney, not far from Bathurst, which is where Peter Hancock was from. Peter Hancock, executed of course in South Africa along with the breaker. So yeah, almost at Bathurst. We'll see if we can find any evidence of Pete when we're there, but here we are in Blaney, another small town. You'd have to turn off the main street to find this. It's a cracker, it's looking good. Trooper Hector Black and D.R. Crichton, who died in South Africa during the Boer War. They give them some rosemary. Look at the lamp. It's a cracker, isn't it? It's beautiful. Any other details? No details of where they died or how. What goes on in here? Little key. I wonder if anyone's still got the key at the council office. Maybe that's where you put the gas, when it used to be a gas lamp, a gas bottle. Quite a lot of names that served in the Boer War from this district, eh? And a couple of nurses, a couple of the ladies. Here's a bit more information. The coronation fountain, erected in 1907 by Clements, the president. Okay, that's great. There's a few daffodils over there and a sign. We'll just go and see if that says anything. You know, some of these big old trees, They may have been planted and they'd be given names like Kitchener, Roberts, Mafeking. I've done a few episodes where we've seen trees that have been named after the events in the Boer War. I mean, this park may be here for that very purpose. I love these daffodils, eh? Are they daffodils? Well, I don't know. It's all faded. Oh, it's a bit of daffodils. Okay, and there's a rotunda over there. Right. Thought I'd just get a bit of footage here. Oh, hell of a drive, I don't know. I must have done another 400 or 500 kilometres today. But anyway, I wanted to get this sign. Alright. Welcome to Bathurst. Peter Hancock. We're a bloody long way from the Spelunkin, mate. I don't think he actually lived in Bathurst. I think he lived in a little outer suburb of Bathurst. But we're going to stop at the information centre if it's open. It's a Monday and it's after 4, so he'll be pushing it. And even if they're there, what are they going to know about Peter Hancock? And he's probably not someone they want to talk about. He's someone that we want to forget. You know, open mind about the guy. Yeah, he definitely was a murderer in times of war. And then you had all those people that spoke up for him, the minister and his superior officers said you couldn't want a nicer, more honest, hard-working guy. Johnny Boer, not liking cold steel, cleared off. The Orange River Colony, November to December 1901, Victoria Spruit, the 30th of November 1901. We haven't heard much from the 3rd Regiment of the New South Wales Mounted Rifles, which was operating in the northeastern Orange River Colony, close to the Vaal River, against De Wet. They'd only arrived in South Africa in April 1901 and were attached to Colonel Remington's column. Lieutenant M.R. Meacham of C Squadron, the 3rd New South Wales Mounted Rifles, sent this letter to his father from Heilbronn on the 4th of December 1901. Quote, on November the 25th, we finished work at Villersdorp, the Vaal River, after capturing Commandant Bades and 7 men. Bades captured at Boerterskraal on the 20th of November 1901 when he was shot through the knee. The river was flooded and unfordable at Villersdorp, so we set to work to cross over all on a small punt. And as we had 200 wagons and the punt only held 1 at a time and 4 bullocks, progress was slow. Parties of 20 men worked in turns all night and the next day. 1 man was drowned, but we could not find his body. We arrived at Heilbronn on the 28th and prepared 600 men of New South Wales, 400 Inniskillings, and 100 Black Watch, and sent for officers to go on a 5 days trek. We joined Colonel Wilson's column, 400 strong, and a pom-pom next day. The combined force moved off in pitch darkness and in face of a threatening storm, and there were breakdowns, mules tangled and wagons bogged. We lost 10 wagons but found them at daylight. Mounted troops moved on about a mile in advance under Colonel Remington, and shortly after our convoy in the rear was attacked. The yeomanry were driven from their ridge, which was taken by 150 Boers, and a troop of Inniskillings stormed the position, but were forced to retire under heavy 800 yards range fire, leaving Lieutenant Oliver dead, riddled with bullets, and 2 men wounded and several horses killed. Our squadron then received an order to hold the kraals from where the Inniskillings had suffered, so away we galloped. The enemy opened fire at 800 yards and shot a horse dead. We dismounted, took cover under a bank, and rifle duel ensued. At one time I was levelling my rifle when a Boer bullet struck its muzzle and glanced onto the ground alongside. We dislodged the Boers and took their position, but our left flank was soon threatened by 400 more Boers, and we were cut off from the convoy which had moved on. Things were uncomfortable for half an hour, but we saw Remington coming to our relief, and we left the ridge for a lower one. Our old position was soon occupied by Boers who opened fire on an ambulance wagon passing them, killing 2 mules and giving the drivers a rough time. This convinced me of the Boer treachery. Having received a fresh store of ammunition, our squadron again charged and captured this position with the aid of Colonel Remington. On the top we found a small kloof where the Boer horses had been hidden, and a shell had burst over them and killed 8, and the remaining 6 we dispatched. We saw 3 dead Boers, and 4 more were killed further down the hill, when the general came with the guns and silenced everything. Most of the other Tumut warriors were with Remington, and only came in for the finish. We then camped, and during the night a heavy hailstorm raged, and 2 inches of water flowed through our bivouacs, and we paddled about knee-deep. We were awakened at 10 p.m. to march, as by some mistake we were short of ammunition, and an attack by De Wet with 2,000 men was likely. At 8 a.m. we camped again, and 13 Boer prisoners were brought in. That night we were camped with pickets 200 yards apart all round, and not being well I turned in with the captain. A terrific roar soon after rang out, and bullets were showered into camp, and the captain jumped up, pulling the tent with him. We ran out to wake up the men, barefooted on the stones and in our shirts, bullets flying everywhere, and horses stampeding. The men were cool and crawled out with fixed bayonets to meet the expected Boer rush. The Boer fire was attracted to a few lights in our camps, but ceased on hearing the cheers from our squadron. Afterwards we ascertained that the enemy withdrew on finding our men ready for them. Several horses and mules were shot in camp, and 1 man through the hip. Our horses were scattered in all directions, but were collected with daylight. The only casualty among the New South Wales mounted rifles was Private Mudgee, who fell from his horse and broke his collarbone on the 29th of November 1901.